Welcome to PL Together Lounge Talks. I'm Adam Geller, founder of Edthena, the video coaching platform used for teacher professional development. Today, we're talking with Andre Daughty. He is a former classroom teacher who now works to inspire parents, teachers, and students across the country through his work. Andre, thanks so much for joining us and being part of PL Together.
Thanks a lot for having me.
So we are continuing this conversation. And in the last segment, we were talking about how educators can prepare for the eventual, it's going to happen conversations about race, both in their community and in America. And one of the things that maybe we could talk about now is your personal experience, because I think sometimes, we hear there's maybe some distance even between the thing that I'm doing in my day-to-day life
Mm-hmm.
and understanding that stuff on TV, right? It feels maybe other. And here we are, you're a Black male, you
Yeah.
were a Black male student, you were a Black male educator. So, maybe we could talk a little bit about that. So just to kind of give people some, I guess maybe a window into one example of a lived experience. Maybe let's start with the experience of being a Black male student. How did issues of race, as you look back on things, how did issues of race in America impact your experience as a student?
Yeah. And now, after all of the readings, you know that this was explicit bias. Like you knew that this was not a microaggression. This was just outwardly, oh, they're racist. I remember the time that it was the fifth grade statewide science fair. And my Title I all Black or all minority school, I was one of two chosen to represent that area at this statewide science fair. So my mom didn't want me to go at the beginning because she wasn't going to be able to be there with me. And then the other person who won with me, who came in second, his mom was like, I'll watch them. I promise you they'll be good. And I was like, okay, let's go for it. So we go to the science fair, we go to the science museum. So statewide, 400, 500 students, and myself and this other kid, we're the only two Blacks. We immediately understand, recognize it, taking our cardboards out, taking our materials for our science project out. I know immediately I am one of two Blacks in this entire room. We've already had the talk. My mom and my dad had the talk with me. I've had that talk my entire life. There's certain protocols, certain ways you speak, code switch, all of those things. So here we are sitting there. So we start the science project, and just like any other science project and science fair, you have certain people walking around, have their rubrics in hand and they're taking score or whatever. And we're sharing our projects and whatnot. Well, it was time for a break. Now, at that time, I didn't have money. Everybody went to the concession stands. Others went to the vending machines. I had no money. So I just wanted to look for a water fountain. I get up, I walk out of the science area, and I'm just looking for a water fountain. And out the corner of my eye, I noticed there's a policeman. The policeman is following me. And I said, oh, okay, no big deal. This has happened before. So I keep walking around. I'm looking around, and it appears that I'm snooping, but I'm looking for a water fountain. I've been talking a lot. I'm thirsty. Well, the policeman follows me again, and he finally comes up to me and he says, boy, what are you doing? And I said, well, first, boy. And so I thought sir, can you show me where the water fountain is? And he's giving me the blues, immediately giving me the blues. I see what you're doing. You're snooping around here. You are trying to do this, that, and the other. I cannot believe. And so now a crowd is forming around me and this police officer. I'm getting nervous. And he's like, I saw you casing the joint. You are about to steal, and I'm going to stop it. So now I'm nervous. I'm scared because I was just looking for water. The saving grace was that other Black kid's mom. She looked around and she noticed I was not at my table where I was supposed to be. So she walked in the hallway and she saw a big crowd. And she walked right through that crowd and said, you will not touch him. What's going on? And he explains to her that I was trying to steal. And she's like, steal? What's there to steal? And they had a big argument, and everybody else was looking at me crazy. All because of the color of my skin. All because I was just looking for water, but I was casing the joint. And so imagine the pain, the heartbreak, the anxiety, the fears, all of those things for a fifth grader. Not to look at me at the content of my character, but just to judge me based off of my skin color. It was very hurtful. I didn't have the same energy the second half of the presentations. My presentation was really good. My science fair project was amazing. I didn't win because I just didn't feel like wanting to be there. And so imagine how long it took for me to overcome that. Of course, I tell my parents. My mom was so fired up. She was like, let's go up there right now. I mean, Adam, she was ready to jump in the car. We were about to get in that car and drive back up to the Science Museum because she was about to give him the blues in the business. It was hurtful. Here I am 30 years later, and I can still remember it. So now we're talking PTSD. I can tell you exactly where I was. Anytime I go to that science museum, I can pinpoint where I was at both spots. And so this is just something that we as educators really need to be mindful of, how just those biases come into play and the lasting harmful effects years later. Second story I can remember, I get the opportunity to speak. You can tell I speak a lot. I talk a lot. I get the opportunity to speak, and I went to one keynote. I was keynoting at one spot, and here I am. This is a pretty big area, and so I walk in, have my bow tie on, business, and I'm just standing at the door waiting for the host to take me up to the front so we can do a sound check and all of the good things. So while I'm standing at the door, a group of educators come in and they look at me and it's like, will you take us to your seat, to the seat? And I look at them and they're thinking that I'm an usher. I have no tag on that says that I'm an usher. I have no volunteer t-shirt saying that I'm a part of nothing. And so I just stand there and I just thought that they were playing a joke at first. And then they got really serious. I said, can you tell us where we need to sit? So now I look at them very firmly because the I said rubbed me the wrong way. And so I look around and say, well, you notice there's a lot of empty seats. You can sit down anywhere. And so they walk through and some of them give me the eye like, yeah. And they walk through and they sit down. And so then the hostess comes to me and I have a decision to make. I either tell the hostess, this is what happened. It was that group right there, or I brush it off and get ready for the keynote. I chose the latter, brush it off, getting ready for the keynote. I give her my computer. We set it up. Everything's good. She gives me the microphone. I got the lapel on. Everything's good. I'm sitting at the very front row. And now it's time for the keynote. And so she introduces me. My name pops up on the screens. You know, the entire auditorium can see my face on both projection boards. And now I've got a decision to make. I'm walking on the stage. Do I explain to this conference what just happened? Do I talk about that in this moment? Because this is a teachable moment. Do I talk about that implicit bias, that microaggression that just happened? Or do I brush it off and then just share what I'm supposed to share? And believe it or not, this just doesn't happen to me. I guarantee if you were to actually have a conversation with a lot of people of color, this conversation would pop up. I remember, Adam, there was a post on Facebook that I posted one time, and it said, when was the first time you realized that you were a Black person living in America? And all through those comments, 5, 6, 7, 4, 12. And so that was a powerful conversation of what happened, how did you feel? And then I flipped it a few days later to my white colleagues, to my non-people of color friends. And I said, when was the first time you realized that you had some form of privilege? And their numbers were 20s, late 20s, early 30s. So you see, race in America, there is a wide gap here. And that's just something that we as a whole really have to work on, continue to work on. That is something we as educators really need to focus in on and once again lean in, because the students of color are getting it in their pre-K, kinder, first grade, second grade years. But our white brothers and sisters are seeing it in their late 20s, early 30s. That's almost a 15 to 20-year gap. And that's something worth having a conversation over, man.
I'm hearing two things there that, I'm trying to kind of, first of all, thank you for sharing your
Yeah.
experiences. And I'm thinking about, the educators who are watching this, that uh, it sounds like, what you're calling out is that, like you said, this was the story of you in fifth grade was overt. But I'm thinking about how maybe the types of actions that you described in the second story, if those are happening in those small little ways to students, that those are going to stick with them as well. So being aware that the experiences that our students are having all along their K-12 trajectory
Mhm.
can really, of course, form them, but can stick with them. And then there's this other thing that you mentioned, which I'm not sure I've really heard said the way you just said it, which is this idea that um, people who are not white in America are confronted with that idea, but we aren't necessarily having a conversation with white students in school settings for an educational purpose to kind of help them see what it means for them to be white at an earlier age. We're kind of leaving that for them to discover as an adult rather than making it part of the learning experiences. And it feels like maybe that's a really big opportunity, maybe for a teacher listening to this, thinking, how am I going to change something material about the way I approach constructing the learning experiences? Maybe that's something new that they haven't heard before. Because I think they're getting a lot of messaging that, things are not good for non-white Americans. Um, but that may not necessarily be actionable for a white teacher. I was a teacher. I'm white, so that would have been me. Whereas creating that specific conversation for my students who were white to start to understand some of the things, as you said, I had learned. Uh, Certainly, as an adult, I was fortunate to have some exposure in high school to kind of confront those things, but I wasn't creating that same opportunity for them. So that feels like a really interesting and actionable idea that you just presented there.
Yeah. And what I love about a lot of today's educators is they're having those conversations. They're putting more than just the Lakeshore stuff on the walls, for sees. They're making sure that they're reaching out and finding books that has protagonists that look like them, that look like their students. I read one study and it said that in today's elementary picture book classrooms, you will find more picture books that have animals as a protagonist before you will people of color. So an actionable step, once again, is just finding those books that have students that look like them inside as protagonists and not just the antagonists. I mean, to me, that blew my mind. And I started thinking about like some of my favorite picture books, Where the Wild Things Are. Yeah, okay. Yeah. Corduroy. Yeah, okay. Yeah. I Love You Forever. Yeah. Those are great books. But there are some other books that we can add in so our students, all of our students, can see the different cultural awareness. Once again, that goes back to cultural awareness, being culturally aware. The more diversity that you have inside of your classroom, the more they will be exposed to the good and the bad from all races.
Well, we have, I feel in some ways, set up the perfect transition for the next part of our conversation, which is that the way you kind of counteract the conditions that you were describing in your own experiences, create the correct culture in a classroom.
Yeah.
And that takes deliberate actions on the part of the teacher. So we'll talk about that in our next segment. We're going to take a quick break. If you're listening to this or watching this somewhere out there on the internet and want to hear more, head to pltogether.org. for this as well as many other conversations. Thanks so much for joining us, and we'll be right back.